The Spanish Grand Prix weekend was all about F1 updates on the cars. We've already talked to you at length about what the new pieces were. We've had Giorgio Piolo and our very own Jake-Boxall Legge talking you through the updates up and down the grid. But how did they work, and who made a step forward in Spain, and who maybe has left the Spanish Grand Prix wondering what's going on with their car? That's what we're going to talk about here, and JBL is joined by Ben Anderson to go through the hits and misses, or the winners and losers from the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. We're starting with the losers because that's more fun. Slight clue on the screen, which is the Renault. Another disappointing weekend for Renault, Ben, on a season that has so far been utterly forgettable compared to the trajectory they were on before 2019. What on earth is going on with Renault, and how did we assess what we saw from them in Spain?
Well, Daniel Ricciardo described the Spanish Grand Prix as a Renault underachieving, but you could use that description for the whole season. You know, they time and again have talked themselves up. We're on this trajectory to close the gap to the top teams, to be fighting Mercedes and Ferrari for the World Championship in 1 or 2, and maybe now it's 3 years' time. But they're not even best of the midfield. They finished last season 4th, and this season they needed to start the season 4th best and build on that. They haven't done that. The car isn't working. The drivers can't seem to get performance out of it consistently. Nico Hülkenberg had a nightmare weekend. Daniel Ricciardo had a decent effort in Q2, but went backwards in the race, beaten by their customer team, McLaren, also the Toro Rossos, which had an upgrade package as well. So yeah, much head scratching going on at Renault. They need a lot of answers to come out of the post-Barcelona Grand Prix test. I think there's some restructuring going on behind the scenes and some more expertise being hired in ex-Ferrari Mercedes engine man. The engine's decent, that's probably the one thing that I'll be happy about, but...
Well, because they upgraded that for Spain, didn't they?
Yeah, they made a lot of noise about the effort they'd gone to bring the upgrade to Spain on the engine side, and also for McLaren. But they've had reliability problems. We saw in Bahrain, both cars break down very close to the finish, and it seems that that's, in Cyril Abiteboul's words, spooked the team. They've been hurt by that. They've lost some confidence. And they've had to dial some things down in order to protect the car. So it looks, unfortunately, like signs of the same old problems that we've seen in the past for Renault.
JBL, an obvious loser from the weekend, as we've talked about this a lot already, so we'll do the brief version now, is Ferrari. There were visible updates on the car, an accelerated engine upgrade came in as well, and yet they were thoroughly beaten by Mercedes and lost out to Max Verstappen as well. So the alarming thing perhaps is that after the weekend, team boss Mattia Binotto was saying, no, the upgrades were good, they did what they were supposed to. So what on earth's going on here?
Well, he's also said that they might need a change of concept. We were lauding it at the start of the season, and now that's just completely not happened for them, has it? They've had one good race, and the other 4 have been a bit rubbish. And Spain was incredibly rubbish from Ferrari's perspective. I said in our post-race podcast that at this stage, I don't know where a win's going to come from, quite frankly. And the drivers seem to be struggling with the turn in the corners. Leclerc and Vettel were just losing confidence in that final sector where turning is so very, very important, because you hit that apex and you've got the lap time, you've got the right line for the next part of the chicane. They didn't seem to have that confidence. And when it comes to Monaco, which is all low speed for the most part, how's Ferrari going to get on? I don't know. I think they're going to be the 3rd best at best, unless they really pull something out of the bag here. So, yeah, it's not looking good for Ferrari at all.
And of course, some of those problems you've mentioned there, JBL, the operational things are almost a legacy of the fact that Ferrari's having to try anything it can, because it just seems to be getting more and more off the pace relative to Mercedes. Now, this is a winners and losers video, so we'll come to Mercedes in a bit, but we're sticking with the teams that maybe fell away over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. And we've got 2 for the price of 1 here, Racing Point and Alfa Romeo. I've done well not to call them Force India and Sauber. Let's start with the car at the front, Ben, the Racing Point. There's been a lot of expectation about what this team can do with a proper budget. We did have some upgrades in Spain, but it seemed largely that the team went backwards.
Yeah, quite disappointed with Racing Point. I was expecting big things from them. We've kind of given them the benefit of the doubt through the first 4 races because of last season's takeover and waiting for that kind of stuff to filter through. They did bring significant updates, as you mentioned. There was new suspension on the car. changes to the floor, barge boards, brake ducts, so significant updates, and you would expect them to start making inroads in pure pace to some of the midfield rivals they've started the season behind, but it didn't really happen. Sergio Perez was really downbeat after trying the parts for the first time in Friday practice, saying everything looks bad, and really things didn't improve from there. He was struggling to hang on to the midfield in qualifying. He made Q2, that was a good effort, but then he was off the pace in Q2, some 8/10 down on the top midfield car, which is a massive gap for a team that usually challenges for 4th or 5th in the World Championship. And the race, well, one to forget. He just wants to move on to Monaco and forget about Barcelona as quickly as possible. But a bit like Renault, they really need the post-Spanish Grand Prix test to understand that car, because in pre-season testing at the same track, they looked to be 8th or 9th best. And we thought, okay, yeah, that's just a basic car. That picture will change as soon as they put updates on. But they're still in that position, and unless they can unlock some serious performance in the next 2 or 3 races, we know sometimes it takes Racing Point a few goes to understand their developments. It'll be worrying times for them, I think.
So there's a chance, perhaps, that they just need a couple more races to get their head around it. JBL, let's move on to the Alphas. We had a change to the front wing, which has been incredibly newsworthy so far this year, initially for its appearance and then for its legality. But are they in the same boat as Racing Point? Did they just not make a big enough step while everyone else around them did?
It's difficult to say, because it was, generally speaking, it was just a terrible race where things went wrong. I don't really recall seeing Giovinazzi through the whole weekend.
He's there.
He's there. That's the first time I've seen him all weekend, actually.
He was definitely there.
Yeah. Raikkonen, he went off on the first lap. He said that he had to try something.
Not what he tried, though.
No. So that immediately basically just ended their day. They were never really on for points, even with the safety car. And it's one of that situation now where we've got a different midfield team at the top each weekend. And Alfa have been in the mix, but this time they were, around 8th, 9th best team throughout the weekend. And that seems to be a legacy of the tyres being different this year. I'm sure I'll go into this a little bit more later on. But it seems to be an opposite of last season, where around about now they'd start to pick up the pace, and now they're sort of falling away. And in Raikkonen, they've got a fantastic test driver. His feedback's very, very precise. They should be able to sort it out. But yeah, it's not been a good weekend for them at all.
OK, we promised we'd come on to the teams who had a good weekend based on their updates. And where better to start than Mercedes, pulling away at the front. Phenomenal start to the season, 5 1-2s already. Ben, as JBL has often explained, Mercedes don't tend to wait for a race like Spain and throw a massive upgrade package at the car. We've seen stuff at almost every race from the team. We saw more pieces in Spain, and based on what we saw, they are just running away with it at the moment. What is making this car and this team so good right now?
Well, we already know that they're a phenomenal team from the work they've done to recover in probably the last 2 seasons, where they've started the season a little bit off colour, particularly with controlling the temperatures of the rear tyres. But this season, the difference is they've hit the ground running. Didn't look like it was going to be that way in pre-season testing, but the last day they seemed to unlock something with the setup. They found a sweet spot, and they've just sat in that sweet spot all the way through the first 5 races, and then adding the little bits to the car that they have done with the upgrades has just stretched their advantage even further. They seem to have got on top of these revised 2019 Pirelli tyres much quicker than any of their rivals, and now they seem to have the sort of car that we praised Ferrari for having in each of the last 2 seasons, one that has quite a wide operating window that you can sit in quite comfortably. I don't think it's as comfortable to drive as those Ferraris were. It looks quite edgy, but it's quick, and the 2 drivers are obviously talented enough to sit in that performance window, and they've gone from what looked like a 2 or 3 tenth deficit potentially to Ferrari towards the end of pre-season testing to being, well, miles clear in terms of qualifying. Bottas was 8 tenths clear of Vettel. I mean, that's a phenomenal advantage, and with Red Bull kind of closing the gap to Ferrari, it's now looking more like 2016, which was a complete Mercedes closed shop.
Yeah, from one championship leader perhaps to another, because if you take the Class B results in Formula 1, this man Kevin Magnussen is now top of the standings again after Haas were back on form, JBL, in Spain. Was this because of upgrades, or was it just a simple case of the story playing out as the team told us it would? They've had a lot of trouble in the first few races, but they said when they got back to Barcelona with higher temperatures and higher energy corners, they thought they'd get back into that performance window that Ben was just talking about with the tyres. So do we think this was Haas making a step forward, or were they just on a happy hunting ground for the car?
I think I'm leaning towards the latter of the two. It's definitely a happy hunting ground for them. Everything they said did happen. And I'll explain why. Even though they did have updates, they did on Friday testing sort of back-to-back running between Grosjean and Magnussen. So Magnussen had the Baku spec car, and Grosjean had the Barcelona spec car with all the new bits and pieces on it. And they found that Magnussen's car worked really well as well. And so when he put the bits on Saturday, he still had some adapting to do to work them out. But the car was still quick. As you say, yeah, it's these high energy corners, there's just so much more opportunity for them to put a lot more load into the tyres. They can warm them up. They don't worry too much about the temperature dropping off and giving them that graining phase. So Haas was definitely on probably their best circuit so far. They had their best weekend so far. The issue that happened was the drivers had contact again. And this was after last year, I think it was Silverstone last year, where they came together. And they said this can't happen again, and it's happened again. And as a result, even though Magnussen collected the 7th place and was best of the rest, Grosjean slipped down to 10th and was very, very lucky not to get overtaken by Alex Albon. So Haas had a very good weekend. Whether that is going to repeat itself in Monaco, we don't know. They're probably the team that's got the most capricious car in terms of performance. It's amazing on weekends like this. And then we'll get somewhere where there's not as much load going through the tyres, and it's just going to be a disaster. So it's been a fantastic weekend for Haas. The upgrades did work, according to Gunsteiner, but yeah, it's mainly the track, I think.